the jury. I will address you that way because as a lawyer I think that way, and that may get me in trouble a lot, but it works. Besides, the Warren Commission used the same kind of thinking, only we can do a whole lot better. The main thing, and the question's been asked, is why is there no agreement on a conspiracy? And I'll tell you, the real answer rests with the ladies and gentlemen of the United States, whose integrity is so much stronger than the integrity of everyone else who's looked at it. 70% of us know there was a conspiracy. And we've been told everything to the contrary by the wise guys. 10% of the country. We have what's called a super majority. And, you know, we should be running the country. The main thing is the word conspiracy, and from a legal standpoint, once you prove a conspiracy, it's on the back of the other side to prove there was no conspiracy. Well, have you heard anybody from the other side come up with any proof? Well, no. So let's take it from there. Now, I'm going to start with my book, which was pretty popular. I mean, it sold a lot, and then we had the documentary, and that was even better. And some funny things happened during all of that. But the book was yesterday when we heard from Richard, and he went through the fingerprint match, and what was so heartwarming was to be able to sit there and see him go through what I'd gone through, and he was acting independently. And it's a real warm feeling when someone really follows what you've done and you're thinking and come out with the same good result. I also had in the book the fingerprints, the admissions, which are admissible, and a lot of other things that showed Lyndon Johnson was behind, had been enlisted by, and had called upon his good old country lawyer, Edward Clark, to arrange the assassination. Those are the words I heard. After that, it was a matter of digging through the evidence, corroborating what I could, and publishing the book, which became a real bestseller. And the only problem with the book was I would be scheduled for certain big shows and be interrupted. And remember these words, I try and find out why, and they say, it came from above. That was that. It happened not just once, and not just to me, but the other side, the 10%, were wielding a heavy stick, shall we say. Anyway, the book comes out, and it got good coverage. About 100 shows here and there, and some really good ones. But the main thing was the response. I had no idea what people were going to say. You can't talk to everyone on one of these kinds of books. But I start getting good responses. I get one letter, an email to my publisher. He says everything in the book is accurate. And it's signed by a guy who says he's a Kennedy. Not only is he a Kennedy, he's related to the Kennedys through the Bouvier family. And he had a critical relationship with the Maverick family in Eagle Pass, which I'll get to in a minute. Everything starts fitting together, though, with this start. Then I get a letter from a real nice lady, and she says, I'd like to talk to you about your book. I have some questions about, I need to talk to you. So we sit down and visit, and it turned out she had been a tutor to, pardon me for a moment, get a little emotional. I was a tutor for John Kennedy Jr. And he had written a poem when he was 17, and he had called it Penitent Society. And he was into what had happened to his father. She could also tell me that he wanted to find who killed his father, and he wanted to run for president in order that he could. So the book is bringing out these people, and I find out later that she sent a copy to Caroline Kennedy, and Caroline, instead of Kennedy's usual approach, now Ted had died, instead of the usual approach, the Kennedys don't want to have anything to do with it. Nah, that's not true. We're not getting involved. Well, okay. So, so she's on standby, waiting to find out what's going to come out of Meg working with me. And I helped her write a book, and I helped her pull together some other evidence. And all went well. Other Kennedys came through then. Some of them are sort of unexpected Kennedy members, like Jack Worthington, who shows up from Australia to tell me that he's John Kennedy's son, not through benefit of clergy. And he wanted the story, his story told. And he had quite a story too. The biggest problem I had was I really didn't have anything at the time linking me into the CIA and other agencies. But Jack comes in and can tell me how his parents had been working with the CIA and had been working with the Mafia through their home in Eagle Pass, which was right down the river from the Smuggler's Hole. I mean, this was a standard route for anyone on an illicit mission to use to get into Mexico back in those days. Well and good, Jack. What else can you tell me? And he starts explaining to me how this gang that had been working through the Frontier Bank in Eagle Pass had been charged with crimes of, well, CIA action, shall we say, and helping move men and weapons and tractors and all this through Eagle Pass. And they've been indicted after Johnson had died, or right around that time. I think it was after he died. And they've been represented by Ed Clark. Now, this was my law partner who I've been working with. And I'm listening to him and trying to, what are you really getting at? And it finally, it's again one of these things where you suddenly realize what he's talking about, and you realize there's a huge connection with the CIA. This kind of cements things. Well, that's a good word to use for the CIA, for the Mafia. No, it was the Mafia. The Mafia weren't on this. Anyway, I'm getting a much more full picture. And since then, I've been working on a sequel to my first book. And in fact, it's nearing completion. Well, it's been completed for a while, but I had well, the publishers don't like authors, so it turns out. But here's part of the sequel. And what this is explaining and laying out a plan for how we're going to take advantage, shall we say, of what I've been able to pull together in the way of a sequel. Then, Gordon Ferry over there shows up. Now, Gordon's going to be a speaker later, but Gordon is providing a timeline and a curve in a movie we're working on. I mean, a lot of things happen. Sometimes a lot of things happen. I've got 3 different contracts out on the movie for the book. And I've been having a real problem in trying to fit all this information together. And then walks Gordon. So we're putting this all together. He's got what I would call the final part of the story. But the main thing is where we go from here, as I see it. We're working right now. We're in the middle of history the whole time. When we discovered the fingerprint match, my partners I was working with, they all wanted to run down and release it to the press, and I said, nope, we're taking it to the police department because this is a real case. This is real evidence. We got to do something with it. So we did that and had the press release too. Other things happened, but what we've got and can bring out now with Gordon are real answers, what I call living history. I mean, we played out in the courthouse, and if the government doesn't want to do it, well, there are ways we can make them do things. One of them is, that I'm working on, is you can bring in new evidence. Oh, and there's so much fast new evidence out there. File a complaint, bring the evidence to them and say, do something with it. Fortunately, at one point anyway, here in Dallas, the police department and the attorney, DA said they entertained new information. Well, we've got it for you. We'll be bringing it in. As a courtesy, we'll send it to the Attorney General and to the FBI. And you guys, you got to do something with it. I mean, you can't just let it. Well, they may not do something with it, but they should. The second thing is, a thing we have really needed is a jury trial. And I'm talking about a jury trial direct. One, John Kennedy against Lyndon Johnson. And I'm working on getting that set up with a jury trial, and with the evidence we have, a lot of it can be stipulated, and put the case on and try it. And let's see how the chips may fall. Another thing that's happened in all of this is a lot of people have been innocent, but pictured very guilty, and they're not. We've already had one mentioned, and that is Lee Harvey Oswald. I read the book on it, and I'm taking it, setting it up to take it to the pardons attorney for pardons in Washington. Here's the case, and the evidence is so strong, I think, that he's got to do something. And that's another thing. They've got to do something with it. It's like the government. When you walk in and you file something, they can't just let it sit there. They've got to receive, process, and so on. And I'm really thinking we're going to make some progress. We also have a petition for a pardon from the governor of Texas. Now this is regarding Billy Saul Estes, who you've heard about. I love the story they tell about how he was involved with a murder in Texas back in '61, ruled a suicide. 1984, it goes back to the grand jury. The grand jury said it was murder. Lyndon Johnson was involved. Ooh, very good. You guys are calling it what it was. Of course, the defense says, well, you can take a ham sandwich to a jury and a grand jury and they'll indict him. Lyndon Johnson, folks, was not a ham sandwich. I mean, if you know you're looking at Lyndon Johnson, you're thinking pretty heavy about who we're talking about here now. So anyway, all these cases are falling together. But the big one, I think, may just turn this whole thing over is Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, if we get a pardon and the circumstances being that what happened, he's innocent. Think about the rest of the cases they have. I mean, they disappear. On the other hand, all is not just insults. On the other hand, there are a lot of people that deserve honor. I mean, they have really performed beautifully. The USDA auditor who was investigating Estes, for example, murder, the one that they said Lyndon Johnson was probably involved, he deserves a medal. He refused to accept a big job in Washington to drop the investigation to go home, leave us alone. I mean, this keeps the case alive, and it's tough. But he was committed to America. I mean, a good patriotic American. And you can't just let that be ignored. U.S. Marshal that investigated the case also deserves a medal. Well, they tried to get rid of him. He wanted to be in a movie. He was just making up all this stuff. Let's try that again. In fact, there are 3 federal judges that say about the marshals, whether you get hired, fired, promoted. And his case was taken by an LBJ appointee to the 3 federal judges. He explains how he should never have taken this to the grand jury. Grand jury has spoken, but he should be fired for doing it. Well, Clint says, go ahead and say all you want to. And when Barefoot had finished doing his talking, Clint had the moral turpitude, shall we say, to explain what was going to happen if they fired him. Well, the other 2 judges who had to rule on the case, both of them thanked the marshal for the great service he was doing, and both had to leave for an airplane. So, in the case. And you don't know about these things, though, but they're the kind of things that really contribute to solving this case and are really courageous. So we're going to ask them about that. And it's a petition. You petition for a gold medallion from the president. And we could go to Congress, but you got to get 2/3 majority from the House and the Senate. I ain't going there. And finally, and I've mentioned this already, what's been going on lately has been an effort to rehabilitate the unrehabilitable Lyndon Johnson. I mean, they're trying to say he was a great civil rights leader. Oh, they're trying to say all these other things, and he wasn't. And every time they do that, though, they diminish John Kennedy. John Kennedy was taking the leadership in civil rights. John Kennedy was really, really working hard for peace. John Kennedy was a good man. Lyndon Johnson, well, he started, I think, doing something to dogs, and I think a mule, and he went from there. He was a mean man, and he doesn't deserve what he's trying to get. And he's getting it over the body of John Kennedy, which is absolutely wrong. So we're taking this to Congress. To amend the ethics for government employees. And we want disclosure. We want integrity. We don't want you guys, making more than you agreed to make. And try and get existing laws, which are good, to make them apply. We're going to apply it to elected officials. And we're going to ask them to change it so that, in case you don't know, if you lie to a federal employee, crime, you're going away. We want it to be for the federal employees, including the congressmen. If they lie to us, they're in trouble too. And just a little equality, but it comes back to the integrity that I mentioned earlier that you guys are so good at. We are. They're even trying to change the story of George Washington. He never chopped down an apple tree. Well, it may have been a peach, but he did chop down a tree. He did get in trouble, and he did something about it. And besides that, it's a real good rule. And so these things, after I've looked at this case and gotten enough together to see what we can do, is to do it. And I laid out, and I call it an order for trial, really all these steps that I've mentioned, and just see what happens, because there's a nice event coming up right now. It's going to be John Kennedy's 100th birthday, and I'm sure you've heard it, May 29, and I think we have the time here to get it done, and particularly with the book and the leadership. And we'll be going down it's in the basement of the Department of Justice. We'll see how we go in and how we come out. But the big thing, and is the movie. Because you really got to get into the emotions of these things. And I've been working with a couple of guys. Bob Dorff, some of you may know him. He was a friend of the guy on the House investigation into the assassination. And he said, well, how are we going to tell it? I said, we're going to tell it one night, the way it was. Now the emotions are there. The emotions just leap out at you. And let me tell you one other thing about the story that I figure best explains it. I mean, we have stories of all kinds, but there was a Greek story about a king who kills his daughter so he can get a fair wind. Okay? He comes back, and the rule of revenge goes to work. The mother kills the father. Well, that leaves the next in line, the son. What's he going to do? He's got to kill his mother. Well, these things finally, sort of seep into the thinking they're a little bit stronger than we need. So instead of him having to kill her, it was decided, first of all, that no vengeance was needed on the dead king except that he was out forever. His reputation was ruined. And on the other hand, we'd go on with life as it should be, supposedly having taken care of justice. In other words, you got to quit killing people. And what happens then is I can bring Gordon in, U.S. Marine, outstanding guy, international financier and all this other stuff. He'll tell you. He'll be on a little later today. But he can come like an arc across this story that can be written as it should be, and maybe just bring home a few things that are being overlooked, including John Kennedy. So these are all in the works. Let me see. I'll warn you. I've run into this phenomenon of talking to someone and all of a sudden realizing, hey, we think the same way. Well, this happens with Gordon. I'm talking to him, and he figures out, well, maybe we're representing the Blitbergs. Somebody's got to do it. I mean, you just don't have a big group of powerful men doing everything. He was working for the banks. What was I doing? Well, I did something that no one else has really done, and that is get a bonus for my former law partner, Ed Clark, in the form of an oil well. Exxon, okay, Rockefellers, who else do you need? You're coming up with the top guys and the money and the power in the country. Jack Worthington, the one I mentioned that could point out to me how his family was involved in moving weapons and people. What he did was work in the construction industry, which is huge. So I'm really hoping that we open up some doors that are very difficult to open and make it impossible not to crack the conspiracy. Besides, they lost anyway. They're 70% of us. 10% of them, the other two are willing to listen, the other 20%. So we got to thank Judith, too, for all the work she does and makes all this possible.